You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie in the USA, and you're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. And we are missing Johanna in Austria today. But don't worry, she's all right. She's great. Everything's good. Her husband's been home. They're getting so much done on the house. Unfortunately, the construction noise was a little bit too much to record with, and they couldn't waste the opportunity to get the work done. So it's just me today. We decided that rather than skip a week, I'd just tell you part 2 on our roller coaster episodes. I have an advantage over Johanna, I think, when we have to record alone, because when I'm done, I still send this to her to be edited. So for me, it just feels like I'm still talking to her, which makes me feel less weird about doing this by myself. So, welcome. Thanks for listening to another episode of your favorite international podcast. Thank you to our patrons. I've just mailed out another round of pins to our murder tier, so please keep your eyes out over the next couple of weeks for those. Also, there is one last thing that I have to ask before we get started. You still have just a few days to nominate us, to vote for us in the People's Choice Podcast Awards. Voting ends on the 31st, just a few days from now, so please, if you haven't voted yet, just pause this real quick and just do it now, please. Go to podcastawards.com and register. They'll ask you to verify your email just to make sure that you're actually a person and not a bot. And you'll find a link there where it'll say nominate, and that's how you vote in the first round. So the nominating is the voting. And we have been nominated in true crime, female-hosted, history, and people's choice. Those are the categories you can vote for us in, and we would be so grateful if you did. Please also vote for the other nominated podcasts that you listen to. That would be great. We would really appreciate it. Also, if you could be sure to check the little box that asks if you want to be considered to vote for the winners in the final round. What that means is only a small percentage of the first round voters are randomly picked to vote for the winner in the second round. There's a panel that also votes, but not everybody is allowed to vote for the winner. So that's another reason they ask for your email address. Keep an eye on your emails. We'll find out on August 7th if we're going to make it through to the next round in any of the categories we were nominated in. And we're really up against some great shows, so it's entirely possible that we will not get enough votes to go to the next round. But if we do, that round of voting goes from August 8th through September 13th. And then the winners will be announced live on September 30th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I don't think I can articulate how stunned we were last year when we won Best Female Hosted. Maybe we can do, Johanna, can we do a viewing party together for the awards? I'll wear my fanciest jammies for it if we can. All right. I think that's all for now. Let's get started talking about today's episode, which is part 2 on our 2-part look into some of the worst roller coaster accidents in history. We said it last week and we'll say it again that roller coasters really are very safe and your odds of being killed while riding one are very low, especially with today's modern safety protocols and inventions. But of course, those inventions and regulations and safety protocols often came about after something horrible happened. Last week, we discussed 2 early coaster crashes. Once the Great Depression began, the general public couldn't really afford to spend their precious money on frivolities like amusements. And those who could still afford it, well, felt badly, spending money on things like roller coasters. And this was true all over the world. Economies were intertwined enough by then that, like today, there was a global effect to the stock market crash. And after the Depression came World War II, and this, unsurprisingly, did nothing to help increase ridership. And roller coaster popularity kind of started to vanish. But after the war, things slowly started to improve. So, last week we told you about 2 pre-Depression accidents that took place in the United States. Today we're looking at more modern international incidents, and I guess now it's time to discuss the very devastating crash of the Big Dipper Rollercoaster at Battersea Park in London. Wikipedia says this about Battersea, quote, Battersea is a large district in South London, part of the London Borough of Wandsworth, England. It is centred 3.5 miles, or 5.6 kilometres, southwest of Charing Cross and extends along the south bank of the River Thames. It includes the 200-acre, which is 0.81 square kilometres, Battersea Park, end quote. Charing Cross is located on the Strand. It's my favourite area to stay when I'm in London. It's considered the very center of the city, and it's the point where London is measured from. So that's kind of a fun fact. Another fun fact, just because we have so many pet lovers, I think it's worth mentioning that Battersea is one of the earliest rescues in England. In 1860, Ms. Mary Tealby and some other animal-loving friends opened the temporary home for lost and starving dogs, which was so popular that they moved to Battersea in 1871, and with the help of donations, they cared for and rehomed dogs. Then, in 1883, Mr. Richard Barlow Kennett approached the charity, and he said that he'd very much like to donate £500, but only if they would use that money and also help the cats. So, they took the money and they helped the cats. And eventually, they became the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, and then more recently, they're just known as Battersea. This is all from their website, battersea.org.uk, so please check them out if you're looking for a new furry family member. You know we love to boost a museum or charity anytime we can. Alright, so this area of Battersea Park once also held a fun fair, and this fun fair was part of the much larger Festival of Britain. The Victoria and Albert Museum, my favorite museum in London, says this about the event, quote, 6 years after the end of the Second World War and exactly 100 years since the famous Great Exhibition of 1851, the first international exhibition of manufactured products, the Festival of Britain, was a display of might and fortitude on a national scale, showcasing the best of British manufacturing and design. The Festival of Britain was intended as a tonic for the nation, a spectacular cultural event to raise the spirits of a country still in the grasp of austerity and rationing, and undergoing severe social and economic reform. Held in the summer of 1951, it provided light relief to 8.5 million people who visited the main festival site on London's South Bank and the events held in cities and towns across the country. Importantly, it also acted as a catalyst for a new design aesthetic, launching the career of noted British designers working in the fields of textiles, furniture, and graphic design. Many of the designs originally produced for the festival have been acquired for our collections. End quote. We'll link to that article so you can check it out. There's a lot of really fascinating information, especially if you are a fan of mid-century modern design. Okay, so part of that festival was the fun fair, and it did so well that when the festival ended and everything was taken down, the fun fair, the amusement park bit of it, stayed on and it remained profitable. One of the most popular attractions was, of course, a wooden roller coaster called the Big Dipper. There are a lot of repetitive names for roller coasters, and Cyclone and any variation of Dipper are always very popular. Not long after it opened, the coaster had a pretty minor incident in which an empty car derailed and stranded some passengers in another car. There weren't any injuries. In 1968, a collision of cars resulted in one injury, a broken arm. And, okay, so here's the thing. Any kind of injury on a ride, right, especially a broken bone, it's serious. It's a problem. But at the same time, if you hear, oh, there was an accident on a roller coaster, and then you find out the worst injury was a broken arm, you think, oh, well, all right, that's not too serious then. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it almost gives a false sense of security. The next big event happened in May of 1970, when there was a fire that was suspected arson that damaged the park, including the roller coaster. And the coaster was closed for about 2 months while repairs took place. Now, I would have assumed that they would have taken that opportunity while they were closed and making repairs to just take the time and really inspect and repair that coaster as needed. But now I'm going to get into the specifics of the accident that is considered to be the world's worst roller coaster accident because it left 5 children dead. So we know that extra safety inspection didn't happen. Here's what did. On May 30th, 1972, the park was packed as it was a weekend, and it was also a school vacation week. Kids were home from school that week. The fun fair was the place to be, and as expected, the line to ride was a really long queue, and the cost was 15 pence. 15 pence in 1972, I looked it up, and a pint of beer was between 14 and 18p, and a can of Coke cost about 6.5 pence. So that gives you a rough idea of how much this ride cost. The Big Dipper had a height of 45 feet or 15 meters, and like many other rides of the day, it had a brakeman. And to explain a brakeman, I'm just going to read you this little snippet from coasterpedia.net. Quote, "A brakeman is an amusement park employee who rides with the roller coaster to slow it down at certain points throughout the ride, particularly bends, as the train is not mechanically held onto the track. The brakeman is also responsible for stopping the train in the station at the end of the ride. Brakemen were common on wooden side friction roller coasters, but have since been made redundant by upstop wheels. Now only a handful of roller coasters that use a brakeman still exist." End quote. We discussed upstop wheels last week. They're the wheels that lock the car onto the track. Okay. There's 31 people, and they are boarding this roller coaster. There are 2 people in a row, 5 rows per car, 3 cars, plus the brakeman. Everyone was seated and ready to have a great time. And the cars on this roller coaster, I would kind of describe them as almost looking like a fancy Santa sleigh with lots of seats. Do you know what I mean? Like, take Santa's sleigh and turn it into a minivan, and that's kind of what you're looking at. This coaster used Hinkle's invention of that chain lift that we also discussed last week, and that pulled the car up the hill so that the traditional, you had that clack, 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 clack of the coaster settling into dogs, which you will maybe remember from last week, are the spikes that keep a roller coaster from rolling backwards in case there's a power failure. So they're clack, clack, clacking up the hill, and they're about to reach the top when suddenly the chain that is towing the car snapped. The 3 cars, with 10 people in each, stopped for a moment and then began to roll backward. At first, some of the passengers thought it was a joke or some sort of new planned gimmick, but as they began to pick up speed, nervous laughter became screams of terror, and the cars plunged backward down the track, with the brakeman just frantically, futilely trying to slow the cars down. The rear car came to a turn in the track, which was actually usually the last turn of the ride, but it was going much too fast and in the wrong direction, and it jumped the track and derailed. The cars following it smashed into it, and children were being crushed. Some children were thrown from the ride. Horrified parents raced into the wreckage, desperately trying to find their children, freeing other children. Other spectators rushed to help, while, eerily, everywhere else in the park, they didn't seem to understand what had happened, and so you could still hear music and laughter. The names of those who died on the Big Dipper that day were Shirley Nash, aged 8, Thomas Harmer, aged 13, David Sate, aged 14. And unfortunately, they all died on the scene, I hope, instantly. And then Deborah Robertson, who was 12, and Allison Comerford, who was aged 15, died a few days later in the hospital. Of course, many of the injuries were those last cars which derailed and had gotten crushed, but Allison was there with her friend Liz, whose birthday it was that day, and Allison was thrown from the ride and found herself on the slippery wooden walkway beside the track, high up on the platform, which is terrifying. After a bit of panic, she calmed down and saw her friend Liz was covered in debris. And so she walked to go take the railing, to hold on to the railing because it was slippery up there. And as she went to take the railing, the wood beneath her feet collapsed and she fell 15 meters. Shirley's 11-year-old sister, Karen, suffered a broken neck, but she did survive. Their father found both of their bodies in the wreckage, I read in one of the newspaper articles, and I can't. Hillary Winter survived the crash. She was 13 and spent 3 months in the hospital learning how to walk again. Many of the children had serious long-term physical challenges due to injuries they sustained, and of course, they all have PTSD. So this crash led to a massive investigation, and the results were shocking. They found just trying to investigate the structure was almost too dangerous due to the slippery algae growth on the wood and obvious wood rot all over the structure, which had killed Allison. But of course, they also found issues with the train and terrible misalignment in the track. Misalignment will cause that really rough ride on a roller coaster. I hate it. It ruins my day, even before I had constant migraines. If you like coasters and ride them a lot, you know what I'm talking about, how just lousy a rough coaster can be. But I don't think it ever occurred to me that in extreme cases, you're looking at derailment risks. In addition to the chain being poorly maintained, there should have been 8 dogs. You know, those anti-rollback devices that we talked about? They're these like spikes that stick up and dig into the train. They should have prevented the train from rolling backwards when that chain snapped. But there were only 4, not 8. And of the 4, 3 were already so damaged they were useless, and the one remaining broke pretty much immediately once the full weight of the train cars full of people were resting on it. And you know how I said that repairing the ride after the fire would just be a great chance to make sure it was totally safe? That did not happen. They did learn that some of the parts sourced to repair the coaster after the fire were over 50 years old. A number of people were charged with manslaughter, but in the end, no one was found guilty. No one served any time, and nothing ever really happened. Nothing came of it. I'm getting angry telling you about this now, and today the survivors and victims' families are also not okay with what happened. In May 2022, so 2 months ago, a cherry tree was planted at the site of the tragedy. Survivors and victims' families, they really feel that this is just a start and are campaigning for a more substantial permanent memorial, and also for a change in the way that victims of serious trauma are cared for and supported, as many of the victims suffered for decades before getting a diagnosis and some support. To this day, this is widely considered the worst roller coaster accident in the world because it has the most deaths and the most serious injuries of any incident that we have or will discuss. So that's completely understandable. If you're wondering why I started with this particular tragedy, it's because we're discussing these incidents in chronological order. I don't ever want to say that one death wasn't as big of a deal as these other deaths, because obviously they're all the most important thing that ever happened to the people who lost them. It's all awful. Okay, our next accident took place in 1986 in Alberta, Canada. That is where West Edmonton Mall, never the West Edmonton Mall, is located, and this place has everything. It's on another level. Until 2004, it was the largest indoor shopping mall in the world, and it's in the Guinness Book of World Records for this. This is the only indoor ride on our list, and some of you are maybe imagining like, oh, it's like a mall with a carousel and like a roller coaster, little children's coaster. Think again. This comes from my new favorite source for all things non-crucial, Wikipedia. Quote, West Edmonton Mall covers a gross area of about 490,000 meters square, which is 5,300,000 square feet. 5,300,000 square feet. My house is less than 2,000 square feet. That's too many square feet. All right, continuing. It holds over 800 stores and services, including 9 attractions, 2 hotels, and over 100 dining venues in the complex, and parking for more than 20,000 vehicles. More than 24,000 people are employed at the property. The mall receives about 32 million visitors a year. It attracts between 90 and 200,000 shoppers daily, depending on the day and season. End quote. Okay, so this sounds like the kind of place I'd have lived at in my youth, but now the idea of 20,000 parking spaces is giving me heartburn. In addition to every conceivable shop you might ever need, West Edmonton Mall has go-karts, several different kinds of mini-golf, depending on your feelings about blacklights, bowling, movie theater, an escape room, an underwater aquarium, a water park, obviously, a shooting range, paddle boats, an ice rink, and of course, roller coasters. The roller coasters were part of Fantasyland, which was the amusement park located inside the mall. And the Mindbender was very cool. The following snippet comes from an article in the Edmonton Journal, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, 23rd of December, 1985. Roller coaster goes at full tilt. Quote, thrill seekers have been lining up all weekend to lay down $3 a crack for a stomach-churning ride on West Edmonton Mall's new triple loop roller coaster. The $6 million bright red steel structure, winding like a 1,267.5 meter snake through a new pavilion beside Fantasyland, has been running at full tilt since it opened Friday, said Bill Canner, Fantasyland's general manager. The coaster is about 40.4 meters high, and passengers on its 4 16-seat trains feel a force 5 times greater than gravity as they zoom through the structure at 95 kilometers an hour, said Dean Eldridge, director of 555 Public Relations. A ride lasts 1 minute, 40 seconds. Teresa Griffin and Karen Durstling, 2 grade 9 students, think it's so great they had taken the ride 11 times by 6:30 p.m. Sunday and were seen back in the lineup for their 12th ride. Quote, it's so fun, said Griffin. End quote. Less than 6 months later, tragedy would strike. So, Rodney Chaco had come to the mall with his friend, 24-year-old David Sager. They were the last to board the coaster, and they were in the very last row of the last car. They were sitting behind a young engaged couple, Tony Mandrusiak, who was 24, and his 21-year-old fiancée, Cindy Sims. The ride was traveling at a high rate of speed, coming around a corner, going 96.5 kilometers or 60 miles an hour, headed for the first of 3 loops, when suddenly the wheel assembly on the last car broke, causing the car to fishtail while still being pulled by the 3 cars in front. The swaying of the last car damaged the undercarriage, causing the only restraint, an old-fashioned lap bar, to unlock and release. The train couldn't clear the loop. It had slowed too much because it was dragging the last car, and as it went up into the loop, it stalled and then rolled backward, and the derailed back car slammed into a concrete pillar. All 4 passengers were thrown from the car to the concrete floor below. 3 died instantly. They were 24-year-old David Sager, 24-year-old Tony Mandrusiak, and 21-year-old Cindy Sims. In a CBC article, the only survivor, Rodney Chaco, who had gone with his friend David, is quoted as saying, I remember feeling it sway and grabbing onto the handle, recalls Chaco. The next thing, I was landing on the ground. The article continues. The crash shattered his lower legs, crushed half his left shoulder, and broke his feet, pelvis, lower back, and every rib on his left side. Doctors, who couldn't count all the fractures in his legs, thought they might have to start amputating, but opted to surgically insert metal plates so the bones might heal. After 6 months in hospital, Chaco stood in leg braces and married his girlfriend Joanne. Chaco eventually ditched the braces and doctors removed the plates from his legs. He continued working for 15 years before he retired because of chronic back pain. End quote. Unsurprisingly, he seems to feel the same way the survivors of the Big Dipper crash did. He would very much like to see a bench with the names of those who lost their lives that day, commemorating them, but so far this has not happened. An investigation was launched, the mall owners were blamed, but the CEO said repeatedly that his own son had ridden the coaster that day. That's how certain he was that the ride was safe. Some blamed the West German designer of the ride, Schwarzkopf. It seems that the families of victims were forced to settle out of court because there were issues in regards to Alberta, Canada's maximum compensation under the law. And so the articles that I read seem to indicate that the families of each of the victims only received $3,000 compensation for the life of their children. Mrs. Mandrusiak, whose son Tony was killed, along with her future daughter-in-law, Cindy Sims, she's quoted as saying, quote, that doesn't even begin to cover the funeral expenses. You can't even buy a cemetery plot for $3,000. End quote. Tony and his fiancée Cindy were buried together. David also left behind a fiancée, and they all left behind family and friends who still miss them every single day. Today, Rod seems like he has just a really high emotional intelligence. He sees what happened as a terrible accident. The investigation blamed a manufacturing defect and flaws in maintenance. The ride had been inspected and passed by an Alberta safety inspector just the day before the tragedy. Before reopening, the ride did undergo a series of safety improvements. So they made the trains smaller. They went from 16 to 12 riders per train, and instead of 4 cars per train, there would only be 3. They also installed anti-rollback device, and they added more seat belts and headrests. Due to a legal kerfuffle with Disney, Fantasyland is now known as Galaxyland. It does seem like this accident did create some major change in regard to safety in the United States, Europe, and Canada, because, of course, the amusement park industry is mostly self-regulated, which we discussed a little bit in the water park episode. So now we're heading back to the UK for our next one, and this is a ride I have been on more than once. I've taken my nephew on this ride. It's called the Treetop Twister. The one I went on was at the West Midlands Safari Park. The one we're discussing today was at Lightwater Valley, which had opened originally as a farm that offered pick-your-own-fruit in 1969, and it was on land that had been in the family since the 1500s. Over the years, it grew and evolved and is perhaps most famous for being the home of the Ultimate, a hybrid coaster which opened in 1991, which holds the record as Europe's longest roller coaster at 7,442 feet or 2,268 meters. But we're not talking about the Ultimate today. Today we're going to be talking about the Treetop Twister. And on June 21st, 2001, Gemma Savage was with friends at the park to celebrate the end of their second year at Durham University. The Treetop Twister is what I would call sort of a middle-of-the-road ride. Definitely not a baby coaster. It spins really fast as it goes up and down the various rises on the track. I get it. It's fun. I totally understand why she wanted to ride it. This type of coaster is called a wild mouse coaster, and Coasterpedia says the following about them, quote, "The wild mouse is a type of roller coaster consisting of sharp, unbanked turns that are navigated by single-car vehicles. Generally, wild mouse roller coasters are small in size and have no inversions, as riders are thrilled by quick changes in direction. These characteristics have led to the wild mouse being very common with traveling fairs. Many amusement parks also operate permanent installations." End quote. And it does. It makes you feel like something's gone wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like it'll stop suddenly and then spin and change direction. But you're on a roller coaster. You're high in the air. It's a good ride. So Gemma is on the ride when there was a malfunction and the ride stopped. There was a problem with the computer and everything stopped. And that's really annoying because the ride was brand new. It had only been open for a month. So a maintenance worker arrived and began to manually bring the cars back down to the loading and unloading area. Unfortunately, the computerized program had not been properly shut down by this maintenance person, and Gemma's carriage collided at speed with another car, and it caused devastating head and spine injuries that Gemma could not survive. She was only 20 years old. The investigation said that faulty wiring was to blame and ruled that the maintenance worker, who had only 1 hour of training and instruction and who had never seen the ride manual, shouldn't be charged. Unfortunately, this was not the only incident to take place at Lightwater Valley on this ride. In May 2019, a 7-year-old boy got on the ride with his mother. Neither of them used the seatbelt, and the lap bar did not come down far enough to securely hold the child in place. He fell between the lap bar and the front of the car and clung to the vehicle before falling 30 feet. I don't have too much information because of privacy, but Elisa Menendez writes a piece for Metro UK saying, quote, "Following the tragedy, an investigation found a catalog of errors, including faulty seatbelts and evidence to show that height safety limits were breached. It found the boy's accident was, quote, entirely avoidable, and the theme park, which is one of Europe's largest, has now been footed with an almost £350,000 legal bill. York Magistrates Court heard the ride had since been closed down, and the park viewed the tragedy with great sadness. The child's mum told the court, quote, "The little boy I took to Lightwater Valley that day is not the same boy that woke up after the surgery. I still grieve for my little boy." End quote. The boy, who cannot be named for legal reasons, had been enjoying a day out during the spring half-term holiday last year. He was not wearing a seatbelt when he got on the Twister ride and fell through a gap between the seat and a restraining bar. But the boy and his mother, who was in the car with him, were not told they had to wear a restraint, and the safety bar was not secure enough to pin the youngster in his seat, the court was told. The boy's mother saw him slip under the bar, and he flew out of the car as it hurtled 3 meters above the ground. He suffered serious head injuries following the fall and was airlifted to hospital in Leeds. Prosecutor Craig Hassel said not all of the ride operators understood the seatbelt rules and the height safety limits for children. The Twister rules state children between 1.2 meters and 1.5 meters, so that's 4 foot to 4'9", must wear seatbelts, but the health and safety executive found several children under the maximum height did not wear them. Examinations of the belts also revealed several were not working properly, it was heard. Even when belts were fastened, there were significant gaps, meaning junior passengers were not secure. This was an entirely avoidable accident. Several children were put at risk, and Lightwater Valley has now been held to account for their failings." End quote. So, that is another just absolutely devastating story on the same ride, and it's also worth mentioning how very, very important it is to be extra careful that head injuries or potential head injuries are monitored very carefully. A lot of the early reports seem to imply that the child who fell was responsive and therefore would be fine. But clearly there were some very serious lasting health repercussions there. It's awful. I've got pictures of myself and my nephew on this when he was little. I've got a death grip on him and have like a leg over his shins, and I had a very firm hold of him. It is a rough, jerky ride, and you get spun around really fast while going up and down those hills. Funnily enough, I rode it with my late husband when he first took me to the safari park on my first trip to England, so that's why I was excited to take our nephew on it. But it's really alarming to know how many safety issues the ride had. How can you minimize your risks if you enjoy a roller coaster? I've got some do's and don'ts for you. All right. Do's, do a little research. Google the park or the ride. If you're in the United States, are you going to be visiting a state with very little regulation and oversight? Because that varies wildly. Look into it. Do obey the rules. It's an amusement park. All they want you to do is have fun. So if they tell you not to do something, it's probably because it'll get you or someone else injured or killed. If the ride tells you to keep your arms and legs inside, keep them inside. Please. And now some don'ts. Don't stand up. There is a reason so many roller coasters say no standing at the top of that lift hill. It baffles me that don't do it. There's a ride at Lagoon Park in Utah, and it's just called Roller Coaster. Sometimes the Roller Coaster, but it's just called Roller Coaster. This is what their website says about it. Quote, "Over 100 years old, the Lagoon Roller Coaster remains one of the most popular attractions at the park and one of only a few wooden coasters between Denver and the West Coast. In 1953, a fire destroyed the front of the coaster. It was rebuilt the following year, and sections of the roller coaster are rebuilt from year to year. To ensure the safety of this ride, inspectors walk and thoroughly check over the tracks in the early morning of each day before putting them in use for the public. The coaster was designed by John Miller, who also designed coasters for Coney Island." End quote. In 1934, a 20-year-old man fell to his death when he attempted to stand up on the roller coaster, and in 1989, a 13-year-old girl had the same happen to her. Don't do it. Don't stand up. All right, I'm going to tell you some more stuff not to do. Don't fake it. If you or your kid aren't tall enough to ride, aren't whatever, don't put lifts in shoes or see if you can fluff the hair or try to get a hat on. I used to do this as a kid. Don't do it. Don't. People are flung from rides because they're too small for those restraints to be effective. An inch might really matter. There's a reason they have those rules for height. And if the ride warns you that people with heart problems shouldn't ride and you have a problem with your heart, please don't ride. Don't assume that warnings are just a cover your ass move by the park and they don't really apply to you or it'll be fine or nothing's going to happen. People die on rides from time to time just because their heart couldn't handle the excitement or the G-force. It's especially tragic when it happens with a previously unknown heart defect. That's happened to people of all ages, from a 12-year-old at Disney to dozens of adult situations. And obviously, you can't plan for something you don't know is an issue, and that kind of loss is always, always devastating. But if you know that you do have an issue, but you just want to ride the thing, maybe think twice about it. Also, please don't assume that amusement park employees are safety experts with advanced medical or physics degrees. They're not. Hopefully, they're all trained on how to operate the ride they're operating, but if you're not sure you can safely ride something, don't. Just don't. All right, my last don't is a biggie, and it causes so many injuries and deaths. Don't enter restricted areas. People have been killed by roller coasters hitting them because they climbed a fence to retrieve something lost. Make sure you secure anything that you aren't prepared to say goodbye to forever. If you love those sunglasses or that hat or whatever it might be, make sure it cannot go anywhere. If you do drop something, speak to an attendant, but don't ever, ever, ever enter a restricted area. So my sister, the Moose, she uses a phone case with slots in it as her wallet. And we were at an amusement park and it fell out of her pocket once while we were on an indoor roller coaster. So we get outside and she realizes she doesn't have her phone and she's panicking. And so I pulled up the, find my phone, and we could see that her phone was still on the ride. And so we went and we spoke to the attendant, and they said, at the end of the day, when the ride is turned off, they walk the track for lost items, which is smart. That's the way to do it. But that we would have to wait for the very end of the day. And that was a little terrifying because we were supposed to be on a 7 a.m. flight the next day. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to get her a replacement license, what we're going to do, call Dad and have him, overnight a passport, and we'll change all our flights. But then we saw the phone was in the gift shop. It was moving. So we went back inside, and unfortunately we had just missed the students who had found it. The next people who got on the ride found her phone. It had fallen out of her pocket into the car, and they grabbed it and held onto it and turned it in. So we were really, really lucky. And after that, her phone went into my purse, which went into a locker. And in case that cautionary tale of almost losing your ID the day before a flight didn't convince you to lock up your stuff, I've of course got some instances that were just the absolute worst that could happen. So on September 7th, 1998, a man who had lost his hat on a roller coaster in California and had entered a restricted part of the park to try to get it back when he was struck not by the roller coaster car, but by the leg of a passenger riding the car. The man died of his injuries, and the woman who hit him fractured her leg, and I'm sure that was a lesser injury, with the trauma of the entire incident, of course, being much worse. On April 29th, 2007, a 21-year-old employee at Legoland was killed after being struck by a ride vehicle on the Extreme roller coaster. This was at the park in Denmark. The employee had climbed over a security fence in order to retrieve a wallet for a guest. In June 2008, a teenage boy was decapitated by a roller coaster after scaling 2 fences in a restricted area at an amusement park in Georgia. It's believed he was trying to retrieve a hat. On the 16th of August, 2018, a 37-year-old employee at Energylandia Lesser I'm probably butchering this, in Zator, Poland, was hit by a train on the Hyperion roller coaster when picking up a cell phone that had been dropped by a guest, and he did not survive his injuries. And I'm really hoping that those are enough examples to convince you that even if you lose your wallet, don't scale a fence. And if you work at a theme park, don't let anyone convince you to put yourself in harm's way to retrieve anything ever, because nothing is worth more than your life. Nothing. Nothing. You are so important. Don't forget about it. All right. So I know I just spent some time telling you about some of the worst things that have happened on and even just around roller coasters, but again, I really want to stress that by and large, roller coasters are very safe. Your odds of dying on a roller coaster are about 1 in 750 million. Your odds of dying in a plane crash are 1 in 11 million. Your odds of dying in a car accident? About 1 in 100. So pay attention. Don't text and drive. Drive sober. Be safe. But also have fun, because roller coasters are really fun and life is really short. Just be careful and do your best to make good choices. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Johanna, I miss you. I don't like doing this by myself. And something good. Okay, Opus is doing great. His surgery was a success, and my something good is the sedatives that we have to keep him calm so he doesn't tear any stitches. Our Dane is very high energy. He can go to daycare, play all day long, come home, immediately drop his favorite toy in your lap. He wants to go out and play. He gets the zoomies. I am so jealous of his energy, and I'm so grateful we've been able to keep him a little bit calmer than usual. He's not hyper. He just has a lot of energy. And you can tell this week that he's really starting to feel better. But yeah, thank you, sedatives. I'm such a worrier when it comes to anything to do with him, but he's my baby. So we'll be going back for an ultrasound in 6 months, and his surgeon is going to look with ultrasound at his abdominal wall, because that's where the outer layer of his stomach has been sort of tacked to his abdominal wall, because deep-chested dogs like Great Danes, Mastiffs, even Basset Hounds, it's not how big the overall dog is, it's how big that chest cavity is. That increases your risk of bloat, which is terrible, terrible. But even worse is the possibility of the stomach twisting, and that is almost always fatal. And so the surgery he's had will hopefully prevent that, although it's really important to always know what the signs of bloat are. So yeah, my something good is that Opus is doing just fine. I had to take a mild sedative myself on the day he had his surgery so I wouldn't cry and make him nervous. And I know Johanna's something good because we just discussed this. So her husband is home, which is awesome, and they are getting so much done. It's incredible. They had crooked floors, and their crooked floors are not crooked any longer. So I'm really jealous because my wonky floors are never going to be level. We're going to have 42 shims under every piece of furniture forever. But Johanna's place is really coming together, and I gotta say, it's just been such a joy watching her sort of take this house and turn it into a home. And I mean, they really are doing everything from the studs up, and it's incredible. I'm so proud of you. You're just killing it. I love it. Okay, we're almost done. I'm going to beg you one more time to please, please, please go to podcastawards.com. They won't spam you, I promise. And please nominate us for Best Female Hosted, True Crime, History, and People's Choice. Please, please, please. While I'm asking for favors, I'm just going to keep going with it. If you could also please take the time to leave us a review if you live in the United States. My goal is to reach 1,000 reviews on iTunes, and we are at 989. The reviews are amazing. They're so appreciated. We cannot tell you how much the kind things you say help us when we're struggling with a really difficult case. So, thank you. If you have any questions about how to listen to us, where to listen to us, how to get in touch with us, where to mail us things, go to our webpage, which is freshhellpodcast.com. You'll also find information there on where to buy merch. We also have Patreon. Shout out to all of our Patreon listeners. Our next game night, it's coming up. It's this Friday, the 29th of July. So, Murder Tier patrons, we will see you for our monthly Cards Against Humanity game. If you're not in our Facebook group, please come join it before we all get banned. Just search Fresh Hell Murder, and that's where you'll find all of the photos that we post and discussions about the cases and what else? Old homes, old cars, old motorcycles, old clothing. There's a lot of cool vintage stuff. Inappropriate memes, personal dilemmas, pet photos. Yeah, it's the happening place to be right now on Facebook, if you didn't know. Now you do. Please tell your dog I said hi. Tell all your pets that we love them. We hope they're staying cool or warm, depending on where you live and what's going on. And please remember to give people the benefit of the doubt. And please be kind to yourself. All right? And, we close the podcast with my sort of personal mantra that's gotten me through some shit, which is, of course, the Churchill quote. If you're going through hell, keep going. Bye.